What do you think you're doing in my bed? Edward Wallace's voice split the quiet like a thunderclap. He stood in the doorway, drenched from the storm outside, disbelief hardening every line of his face. The mansion's master bedroom glowed softly in lamplight, and there, on his bed, lay Emma Brooks, still in her crisp maid's uniform, fast asleep. In her arms rested his triplets, Nyla, Kyla, and Tyra, their tiny forms curled against her like petals around warmth. Nyla's hand clutched the edge of Emma's sleeve. Kyla's cheek pressed to her chest. Tyra's breathing rose and fell in perfect rhythm, steady and calm for the first time in weeks. Edward's pulse hammered. "Wake up," he said sharply. Emma stirred, blinking. The moment her eyes found his, realization dawned. She sat up fast, careful not to wake the girls. "Sir, please. Enough." His tone cut like glass. "You're dismissed. Effective immediately." She froze, confusion flickering across her tired face. "Mr. Wallace, they wouldn't stop crying." I said enough." He turned away before she could finish, his jaw tight with fury he didn't fully understand. Emma exhaled softly, then rose without protest. She gathered her shoes from the floor, looked down at the 3 babies sleeping soundly, and brushed a gentle kiss across each forehead. "Be good, little ones," she whispered. By the time she stepped into the rain outside, the triplets were crying again, soft, broken sounds that echoed through the grand, empty house. Edward stood motionless, the echo of their wails cutting through him. He had silenced the one person who'd finally brought peace to his home. A folded piece of paper caught his eye on the nightstand. He picked it up, hands trembling. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will. But before we begin, click subscribe, like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story." His reflection in the mirror stared back, a man hollowed by loss, suffocating in control, and too blind to see the miracle that had just slipped out his front door. The thunder outside rolled again, but inside the mansion, the sound that lingered was smaller, sadder, the sound of 3 infants crying for the only comfort they'd ever known. Hours later, as the storm quieted and guilt sank deep, Edward sat alone in the nursery. The memory of his late wife's laughter haunted the silence. He'd built his world on order, control, and rules, yet a stranger's kindness had undone him completely. The clock ticked toward dawn. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the triplets' cries. One by one, their sobs rose through the mansion like waves breaking against stone walls. Nyla's wail was sharp, desperate. Kyla's turned to hiccups of exhaustion. Tyra's voice, the smallest, came in broken bursts that made Edward's chest ache. He tried everything, bottles, music, the white noise machine the pediatrician recommended, nothing worked. His hands trembled as he held them, awkward, unsure. Each time he set one down, another started crying. Within minutes, all 3 were screaming again. Mrs. Daly appeared in the doorway, her robe pulled tight, her gray hair loose around her face. She'd served his family for 2 decades, through Clara's wedding, her pregnancy, her funeral. She stood watching him now, eyes full of pity. "Sir," she said softly, "you can't do this alone." Edward didn't look up. "I'll hire another nanny." "You've hired 6, she reminded him gently. "And none of them lasted." He didn't respond. Mrs. Daly sighed, stepping closer. "That young woman didn't take anything from this house but peace. Maybe that's what you needed most." Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. When she left, he sat there in the half-light, surrounded by the smell of milk, powder, and sleeplessness. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, damp hair, tie loosened. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and headlines was now defeated by 3 tiny lives that didn't understand loss, only felt it. His gaze fell to the folded note lying on the table beside the crib. The edges were soft now, the ink slightly smudged from his fingers. He opened it again, reading slowly. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." A lump rose in his throat. For the first time since Clara's funeral, Edward Wallace let himself weep, quietly, painfully, as the mansion around him filled with the cries of children who no longer knew how to sleep. By the 3rd sleepless night, the mansion felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The triplets' cries echoed through the halls, but what haunted Edward most was the quiet in between, the kind that pressed against his chest and whispered her name. At dawn, he called his assistant. "Find her," he said simply. No explanation. No name needed. Everyone in the household knew who her meant. It took less than a day. By evening, Edward's car rolled to a stop outside a weathered brick building on the city's south side, a small community daycare with paint peeling around the windows and laughter spilling through the cracks. Inside, children of every shade and size ran barefoot across scuffed floors, their giggles like sunlight in sound. And there she was. Emma Brooks, sleeves rolled up, a streak of flour on her cheek, bouncing a toddler on her hip while another tugged at her apron. She was laughing, the sound soft and warm, carrying over the chaos like a lullaby. Edward stood in the doorway, speechless. The last time he'd seen her, she'd walked away in silence. Now, she looked alive. Whole. When she noticed him, the laughter faded, replaced by quiet surprise. "Mr. Wallace," she said carefully. "I came to apologize," he managed. "And to ask you back." Her expression didn't soften. "You don't need to apologize to me," she said. "You need to apologize to them. They didn't understand why I left." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why do you do this? Take care of everyone else's children?" Emma's eyes flickered. "Because I couldn't save my sister's baby," she said quietly. "The system failed her. I won't fail another child if I can help it." The words settled like ash. When he asked again for her return, she nodded slowly. "Only on my terms." She listed them calmly. "No cameras in the nursery. Family meals with the girls. And you respect my judgment, always." Edward exhaled, shoulders lowering. "Agreed," he said, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. For the first time in years, Edward Wallace, billionaire, widower, perfectionist, had said yes to someone who had nothing but kindness to offer. And for the first time, it felt right. The mansion felt different the morning Emma returned. The air was still heavy, but not empty. Staff members gathered in quiet clusters, whispering as she crossed the marble foyer, the same woman who had left in the rain, now walking with calm purpose. Mrs. Daly met her at the base of the staircase, relief softening her stern features. "Welcome home, Miss Brooks," she said quietly, as if the walls themselves might shatter from the sound. Emma smiled. "Let's make it a real home this time." The triplets were the first to feel it. Nyla giggled at the sound of Emma's voice. Kyla reached for her with both arms. Tyra, shy and cautious, buried her face in Emma's neck, and for the first time in days, she didn't cry. By afternoon, the house began to breathe again. Laughter returned during bath time, splashes echoing down hallways that had forgotten joy. Soft jazz drifted through the nursery during feedings, replacing the mechanical hum of monitors. The scent of warm milk and lavender filled the air. Edward watched from the doorway most nights, unsure what to say. He was used to order, schedules, charts, perfection. But Emma moved differently. She adjusted when the girls' moods shifted, whispered to them as if they understood every word. One evening, he tried to intervene. "You should put them down now," he said, glancing at the clock. "It's past their sleep window." Emma didn't turn around. "They'll sleep when they feel safe," she replied. His jaw tightened. "Routine matters. So does trust." She faced him then, her eyes steady but kind. "You hired me to heal them, not control me." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Edward nodded, just once, stepping back from the crib. Something in him shifted that night, not dramatically, but enough. He stopped giving orders and started listening. Days passed, and the mansion transformed. The triplets' laughter grew louder. The staff smiled more. Even Edward found himself pausing outside the nursery, just to hear the melody of Emma's humming. One night, as the twins drifted to sleep and Tyra clutched Emma's finger, Edward caught himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time since Clara died. Peace had returned, fragile and new, carried on the sound of a lullaby. The morning began quietly, sunlight spilling through the tall windows of Edward's study. For the first time in months, the air felt calm. The triplets' laughter drifted faintly from the nursery upstairs, a melody he was still learning to love. Then the courier arrived. A single envelope, yellowed and creased, stamped with the seal of his late wife's attorney. The sight of it froze him. Clara's handwriting graced the front in looping script, a letter dated a week before she died. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. "My dearest Edward, if you're reading this, then our girls have arrived safely, even if I didn't stay to see them grow. Please don't fill their world with charts and rules. Find someone kind, not qualified. Love can raise what logic cannot." The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. Clara had known him too well, known the walls he'd build around grief, the control he'd mistake for strength. And somehow, she had known about Emma before he did. He folded the letter carefully, setting it beside the family photo on his desk. For the first time in years, he whispered his wife's name out loud. That same afternoon, the world intruded. By evening, his phone began to buzz, messages, calls, alerts. A photo had surfaced online, Emma in the garden, cradling one of the triplets, sunlight haloing her face. The headline screamed across the news feeds. "Billionaire's maid or mistress?" Within hours, gossip sites devoured the story. The staff whispered. Reporters gathered at the gates. Emma, mortified, stayed hidden in the nursery, tears shining in her eyes. "I never wanted attention," she said quietly when Edward found her. "Maybe it's better if I leave before it ruins you." He didn't hesitate. Standing before the cameras that evening, Edward Wallace looked straight into the lenses and said, his voice firm and clear, "This woman is the heart of my home. I trust her with what I love most." The words went viral, but for Emma, they landed deeper than any apology could. For the first time, she saw the man behind the fortune, not the billionaire who fired her, but the broken husband learning how to love again. The night began with thunder. Heavy clouds rolled over the city, and the Wallace mansion trembled under the weight of the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, lightning flickered like veins of white fire, and the wind howled through the chimney flues. Edward was in his study when the first crack of thunder struck so close it shook the glass. The lights flickered, then died. He started toward the hall when he smelled it, faint, sharp, unmistakable. Smoke. The alarms didn't sound. Power failure. Panic surged through him as he ran toward the east wing. The closer he got, the thicker the smoke became, curling down the hallway, black and choking. "Emma," he shouted, coughing. No answer. Then, through the haze, a shadow moved inside the nursery. She was barefoot, her nightdress streaked with soot, one arm clutching a screaming Nyla, the other dragging blankets around Kyla and Tyra. She dropped to her knees, trying to shield all three with her body as embers rained from the ceiling. "Get out!" Edward roared, but she didn't move. "They're scared," she cried back, voice hoarse. "They won't let go." He surged forward, eyes burning, lungs screaming for air. He grabbed a blanket, threw it over them, and lifted all four, Emma and the babies tangled together, into his arms. He could feel the heat biting at his back as he pushed through the smoke toward the hallway. By the time they stumbled outside, the rain hit them like salvation. Firemen were already arriving, their sirens cutting through the chaos. Edward lowered Emma gently onto the wet grass. Her hair was damp, her skin streaked with ash, her hands blistered from heat, but she was alive. The triplets wailed until Emma's voice, weak but steady, soothed them again. Edward knelt beside her, his breath ragged. "You could have died," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes glassy with exhaustion but calm. "Better me than them." The east wing of the mansion burned long into the night, sparks vanishing into the storm. But inside Edward, something else was consumed, the walls he'd built, the pride he'd worn like armor. In the ruins of fire and rain, his heart began to thaw. Weeks passed, and the mansion bore its scars. The east wing stood shrouded in scaffolding, the air still faintly scented with smoke despite the endless scrubbing. The laughter of the triplets had returned, but softer now, cautious, as if even they sensed that something fragile was mending. Emma's burns healed slowly. Her hands were bandaged for weeks, yet she never stopped working. She hummed lullabies with a rasp in her throat, soothed the girls when thunder rolled, and smiled when Edward thanked her, though the smile never quite reached her eyes. He noticed. Every day, he noticed. One night, he found her standing in the garden, watching the workers hammer new beams into the damaged roof. Rain threatened again, but she didn't move. "You should rest," he said gently. "I will," she murmured, not turning. "They'll be fine now." Something in her tone unsettled him, but he didn't ask. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. 2 mornings later, the mansion woke to silence. The nursery door was open. The rocking chair sat still, the triplets sleeping soundly for once. On the nightstand lay a folded letter, her handwriting delicate and certain. "They need a father, not a shadow hiding behind regret. You've already given them that. Don't lose it chasing what's gone." No signature. No forwarding address. Edward read it twice, his heart tightening with each line. He searched every room, every hall, as if she might be hiding behind a door, waiting for him to prove he'd learned. But the house was empty, and her absence filled every corner. That night, rain returned, soft and steady. Edward stood in the nursery, the same place where he'd once fired her, the same room she'd nearly died saving. The triplets stirred in their cribs, murmuring in their sleep. The house felt different now, not haunted, but grieving. Like it, too, understood loss. He picked up her letter again, tracing the edges with his thumb. The words didn't sound like farewell, they sounded like a challenge. And for the first time, Edward Wallace didn't want to control what came next. He wanted to make it right. He would find her, not as a billionaire seeking his nanny, but as a man seeking forgiveness. It took Edward 3 weeks to find her. Every lead ended in silence until Mrs. Daly mentioned a rumor, a young woman volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, one who never stayed still when there were children to hold. When Edward arrived, the shelter was humming with life. Laughter mingled with the soft cries of newborns. The smell of warm milk and soap filled the air. He followed the sound of Emma's voice down a narrow hallway, gentle, steady, instructive. She was seated on the floor among a circle of young mothers, demonstrating how to cradle a baby with confidence. "They feel everything you do," she said softly. "If you're calm, they'll believe they're safe." It was the same tone she'd used with his daughters, the same calm that had once tamed a storm inside his house. The door creaked, and 3 familiar giggles broke through the quiet. "Mama, Emma." The triplets darted from behind Edward, racing across the room before anyone could stop them. Nyla clung to her neck. Kyla pressed a kiss to her cheek. Tyra buried her face in Emma's shoulder and sighed, content. Emma froze, then laughed through sudden tears. "Oh, my loves," she whispered, holding all 3. Edward stood at the doorway, emotion tightening his chest. "I had to bring them," he said softly. "They wouldn't stop asking for you." The room seemed to fade until it was only them. "I owe you an apology," Edward continued. "Not just for what I said, but for what I didn't understand. You didn't just care for them, you saved me." Emma met his gaze, quiet and cautious. "I didn't save you, Edward. You just learned how to stay." He smiled faintly. "Then let me stay differently." A week later, headlines announced his donation, millions set aside to launch the Wallace Brooks Foundation for Renewal, a project dedicated to supporting single mothers and abandoned children. When the mansion's East Wing reopened, it was no longer a nursery but a community center filled with laughter, learning, and hope. Emma agreed to return, not as a maid, but as director and partner. And when Edward caught her smiling at the children playing on the new floor, he realized something deeper was growing between them, quiet, patient, and real. 2 years later, the Wallace mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. The East Wing, once charred and lifeless, now rang with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the hum of community. The triplets, Nyla, Kyla, and Tyra, were toddlers now, their giggles threading through every corridor like sunlight through glass. Downstairs, the renovated hall had become the beating heart of the Wallace Brooks Foundation for Renewal. Mothers came and went, arms full of babies, hearts full of hope. Edward moved easily among them, no longer the distant billionaire, but a man who knew every name, every story. And beside him, always, was Emma. They led together, not as employer and employee, but as equals. She handled the children's programs, he managed the funding and logistics. Sometimes, when meetings ended and the rooms emptied, their hands brushed over the same stack of papers, and neither pulled away. The air between them was warm, wordless, full of something that had taken root long before either admitted it. That evening, the family gathered in the garden. The triplets toddled between rows of flowers, chattering about worms and petals while Emma knelt beside them, guiding their small hands into the soil. Edward crouched opposite her, holding a young rose bush. "Careful," Emma said with a soft laugh as Nyla nearly toppled the plant. "We want it to grow straight." Edward steadied the stem. Their eyes met over the rim of the pot, a smile passing between them. "They'll bloom every year," Emma murmured, pressing soil over the roots. Edward's voice was quiet, certain. "So will we." The triplet squealed when he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, not in grandeur, but in honesty. "You never needed saving," he said, opening it. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to build something with you. Something that lasts." Emma's hand trembled as she touched the ring, a simple band, elegant and true. "Only if it's built on both our names," she whispered. "Always," he said. As dusk settled, the mansion glowed with golden light, laughter spilling through its windows. Where grief once ruled, love and purpose now lived side by side. And in that soft evening calm, one truth lingered: no nanny lasted with the billionaire's triplets, until a black maid did the impossible. Thank you for watching till the end. Click subscribe and let me know the lessons you learned in the comment below, and turn on the notification bell because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it.